The moon landing was one of the most historic events to ever happen in mankind. But it turns out that the full story of what happened on the surface of the moon and inside that spacecraft may have been hidden for years. For over 50 years, Buzz Aldrin, the second human to ever walk on the moon, stayed tight-lipped about certain moments during that legendary mission. But now, he's finally breaking his silence. And what he revealed will definitely send chills down your spine. Why did Buzz really avoid interviews for so long after Apollo 11? What was it he saw outside that spacecraft that NASA could never fully explain? And why is he suddenly pushing so hard for humans to colonize Mars? You'll be shocked to find out why. Buzz's life before Apollo 11. For years, people have raised eyebrows, questioned NASA's moon landing, and wondered if we were being told the whole story. There have been endless speculations and conspiracy theories surrounding that historical day. And now, after so many years of staying silent, Buzz Aldrin can't hold back the truth any longer. He's spilling it all out. But here's the thing. To understand what Buzz Aldrin finally confessed, we've got to rewind the tape all the way back to the very beginning. Because although the moon might be where his story became famous, it's not where it started. Before Buzz Aldrin became the moonwalking icon we all know today, his life was already something out of a movie. His story isn't your average superhero story, no. Before he stepped foot on the moon, his life was packed with some intense pressure, brilliance, trauma, and a whole lot of secrets that shaped the man he became. You see, Buzz Aldrin wasn't just some kid who dreamed about the stars. He was born into aviation royalty, and his full name is Edwin Eugene Aldrin Jr. That's right, Buzz was actually a nickname. It came from his baby sister, who mispronounced the word brother as Buzzer, which was later shortened to Buzz. Eventually, the nickname stuck so hard that he decided to make it official in 1988. And so, he legally changed his name from Edwin to Buzz. He was born January 20th, 1930, in Glen Ridge, New Jersey, during the Great Depression, a rough time for the world. But little Buzz came into the world with some major advantages. His dad, Edwin Aldrin Sr., was no ordinary man. He was a military aviator during World War I and a pioneer in the aviation industry. His father's shoes were pretty big to fill, and Buzz grew up under that shadow of excellence. It wasn't enough to be smart or good. He had to be the best, and that's what he did. Buzz was a really smart kid, and due to this, his father wanted him to go to the United States Naval Academy. However, Buzz had other plans, and he wasn't into ships. In fact, he considered them a distraction from his one true love, which was flying. He also suffered from seasickness, and so he told his father no. Buzz eventually got accepted into the United States Military Academy at West Point, which is like the Ivy League of military training. He graduated third in his class in 1951 with a degree in mechanical engineering. But Buzz wasn't just about books. He wanted more. And so he immediately went into the United States Air Force, where he served as a fighter pilot in the Korean War. Do you know that Buzz flew 66 combat missions in the Korean War? He shot down 2 enemy jet fighters, which is no joke, and he came home with decorations, including the Distinguished Flying Cross. But behind the medals, it wasn't all fun and games. It was something darker. War changes people, not just mentally, but emotionally. And Buzz was not left out. He saw people die. He saw young pilots crash, and it planted something deep inside him. After the war, Buzz enrolled at Massachusetts Institute of Technology to pursue a doctorate in astronautics. In his doctoral thesis, the dedication read, "In the hopes that this work may in some way contribute to their exploration of space. This is dedicated to the crew members of this country's present and future manned space programs. If only I could join them in their exciting endeavors." You'd think someone like Buzz would be begged to join NASA, right? However, that didn't happen. Instead, when NASA picked its first group of astronauts, the famous Mercury 7, Buzz wasn't on the list. He applied, however, they said no. But he didn't give up. he kept pushing and kept applying. And finally, in 1963, he was accepted into NASA's Astronaut Group 3. It was a different class of astronauts, more technical and more academic. Before Apollo, there was Gemini, NASA's second manned space program. Buzz got his first real mission with Gemini 12 in 1966, alongside Jim Lovell. This mission was make or break for Buzz because extravehicular activity, also known as spacewalks, had been a disaster on earlier missions. Astronauts struggled, equipment failed, and it was clumsy and dangerous. But Buzz gave it his all. He trained constantly. He practiced underwater to simulate zero gravity, and he nailed the mission. He completed a spacewalk lasting over 5 hours and made it look easy. NASA was impressed, and that mission put him in line for Apollo. Do you know that the Apollo 11 mission, which made Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin household names, was not a smooth, heroic fairy tale the way NASA tried to make it look behind the scenes? It was ruthless, strategic, political, and even a little shady. We're talking backroom decisions, ego wars, risky training, and a countdown that nearly didn't happen. The Apollo 11 mission. Here's the part many people don't know about. NASA was actually under serious pressure during the Apollo missions. The Cold War was heating up, and the Soviet Union had already scored a big win by sending Yuri Gagarin into space first in 1961. America felt humiliated. So President John F. Kennedy made a bold move and told the world, "We choose to go to the moon." It was game on, and NASA had to deliver fast. There were earlier Apollo 8 and Apollo 10 missions, which were basically test runs. But suddenly, it was announced that Apollo 11 would involve landing on the moon. But here's where the drama starts. NASA had a system that ensured that if you were backup for one mission, you were prime crew 3 missions later. Buzz Aldrin was backup for Apollo 8, and so, by that rule, he was slotted for Apollo 11 to be joined by crewmates Neil Armstrong and Michael Collins. But from the moment journalists began asking who among the crew members would actually land on the moon first, things got messy. Buzz thought he would be the first. After all, he was the spacewalk expert. He'd trained harder than anyone. However, NASA made their call and announced that Armstrong would go first, and Buzz was completely furious. Reports had it that Buzz Aldrin's ego was huge, but Neil Armstrong, on the other hand, was seen as humble, cautious, and safe. NASA knew millions, maybe even billions of people would watch the moment someone stepped onto the moon. So they wanted a hero who wouldn't say anything controversial or do anything risky. Buzz lobbied hard to take that first step. He even tried to get the rules changed. But in the end, NASA told him flat out, "Neil goes first," and he had to swallow that and live with the resentment for decades. Once the crew was locked in, the real grind began. The crew members spent thousands of hours inside simulation modules that mimicked the lunar module and command module. Every single switch, sequence, and emergency scenario was drilled into them because no errors could be allowed. NASA literally built fake moon landscapes out in the desert, and Buzz and Neil trained in bulky suits under the hot sun, practicing how to walk, collect samples, and set up equipment. The gear was clunky, the suits were heavy, and the visibility wasn't great, but they had to get it done. Buzz and Neil had to learn to land the lunar module manually. They trained on a machine called the Lunar Landing Training Vehicle, which was basically a flying death trap. And guess what? Neil Armstrong actually crashed one. Thankfully, he ejected seconds before it exploded. Had he hesitated, he would have died. That's how risky the training was. But the mission wasn't just physical. NASA tested their psychological endurance with isolation chambers and emergency response drills. They had to memorize endless checklists and procedures, because in space, panic equals death. Buzz and Neil were both trained in geology, so they'd know which lunar samples to collect. They had to know what was valuable and what was just moon dirt. Buzz, being the brainiac, took this part seriously. He studied like a college student before finals. He wanted to prove he wasn't just muscle, he was intellect. In the final weeks before liftoff, the pressure was unbearable. Engineers double-checked every line of code in the onboard computer because even the slightest glitch could kill the crew. To make matters worse, there were last-minute scares. There were rumors of a fuel leak in the launch system, and NASA had to swap out parts of the Saturn V days before launch due to a faulty valve. This wasn't just about going to the moon, this was also about surviving the launch. And so, on July 16, 1969, the day of destiny, over 1 million people gathered near Cape Canaveral. Families, journalists, and even celebrities camped out just to see the rocket launch. Around the world, over 600 million people tuned in. Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong, and Michael Collins suited up in those iconic white suits. They took the slow elevator up the launch tower of the Saturn V rocket. At 9:32 a.m., the engines ignited. The ground shook, fire roared, and the Saturn V lifted off. As the rocket climbed higher, everyone on Earth stared in awe. But inside that capsule, Buzz stayed calm, focused, and determined. But what happened after liftoff was not what the crew members had expected. The moon landing wasn't smooth. Buzz and Neil faced near disaster in the lunar module. They almost ran out of fuel. Buzz hit a switch that nearly ended everything. And then came the moment, the step, the words, and the secrets that followed. The historic landing. 3. On July 20th, 1969, Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong entered into the lunar module, also known as Eagle, and began their descent toward the moon's surface. The whole world was watching their every move and every word. But what most people don't know is that this landing almost didn't happen. Buzz Aldrin almost broke the mission, and that iconic American flag moment. Behind the scenes, it wasn't what you thought it was. 5 minutes into the descent burn, the guidance computer distracted the crew with the first of several alarms. Everyone on the ground panicked, and Mission Control began scrambling to identify the alarm. People were worried about it being a fuel issue, a computer failure, or even an incoming crash warning. However, it turns out that it was just a computer overload, and the computer engineer eventually told them it was completely safe to continue. But that wasn't the only problem they encountered. You see, when Armstrong looked outside, he discovered that the computer's landing target was not a good area. The lunar module was drifting off course by several miles, and it was headed for a field of boulders. And so, Neil Armstrong took manual control of the craft. Buzz Aldrin fed him data non-stop, the altitude, descent rate, and fuel status. They were flying low and slow, trying to find a safe place to land, while the fuel gauge was dropping fast. Finally, the Eagle landed, and Mission Control erupted with cheers and maybe some tears. But inside the lunar module, Buzz and Neil didn't celebrate. They were dead silent, because they had only about 17 seconds of fuel left. If they had hesitated even a moment longer, they would have crashed into the moon. After hours of systems checks and prep, it was time for the historic walk. Neil Armstrong climbed down first, declaring the legendary quote, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Buzz Aldrin followed about 20 minutes later, and his first words on the moon were, "Beautiful view." Armstrong replied to him by asking, "Isn't that something? Magnificent sight out here." And Buzz answered, "Magnificent desolation." The two men explored the lunar surface. But when it was time to plant the American flag on the moon, what was supposed to be a proud, perfect moment turned out different. Buzz and Neil unpacked the flag, but they immediately ran into problems. The lunar soil was way harder than expected. The flagpole wouldn't go in deep enough, and the mechanism to extend the flag got stuck. So, when they finally stood back for the iconic photo, the flag looked floppy and pretty lopsided. Reports had it that Buzz was annoyed mostly because he had practiced this exact move dozens of times on Earth. However, up there, everything was different. He later said, "Of all the jobs I had to do on the moon, the one I wanted to go the smoothest was the flag raising. Oh, and here's a secret NASA didn't tell the world right away. When they blasted off from the moon, the rocket exhaust actually knocked the flag over." But here's the part Buzz never wanted to talk about. Do you know that while inside the cramped lunar module, moving around in bulky suits, Buzz accidentally broke something? And not just anything. He broke the circuit breaker that armed the engine they needed to launch off the moon. Buzz had snapped off the one thing that could get them home. They tried not to panic, but if that engine didn't fire, it meant that they would be stranded on the moon. So Buzz got creative. He took a felt-tip pen from his suit pocket, like a regular marker, and stuck it into the hole. Thankfully, it worked. The engine was armed, and Buzz Aldrin saved the mission and their lives with a pen. And even though Neil got the glory, Buzz was the one who made sure they left the moon alive. So while the world watched two heroes take calm, graceful steps on the moon, behind the scenes, they were sweating. However, nothing could have prepared them for what they met when they got back home to Earth. Buzz came back home a hero, but inside, he was spiraling. Life after Apollo 11. When Buzz and Armstrong got back to Earth, NASA and the United States government launched a full-blown victory parade circus, a whirlwind global tour through 25 countries. It was non-stop. Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Buzz Aldrin were being treated like gods, and Buzz, in his biography titled Return to Earth, later confessed that this was much harder than the actual journey to the moon. Deep down, Buzz felt lost. Adapting to fame and celebrity status was far from easy. NASA expected their astronauts to be squeaky clean. Zero mistakes, just picture-perfect poster boys. However, reports had it that Buzz struggled with fitting this mold. He was blunt, awkward in interviews, and at some point he started feeling like a robot trapped in a suit. Behind closed doors, his mental health was spiraling. To make matters worse, he kept struggling with a loss of purpose. He'd achieved the impossible, and now, what was next? It felt like there was nothing left to reach for, nothing that would come close to landing on the moon. And that's when the depression set in. By the early 1970s, Buzz Aldrin's public image was still shiny, but privately he was drinking heavily. Alcohol became his way of numbing the pressure, the confusion, and the guilt of feeling empty after doing something as monumental as walking on the moon. He once said, "I wanted to resume my duties, but there were no duties to resume. There was no goal, no sense of calling, no project worth pouring myself into." It got so bad that he struggled to get out of bed most days, and it began to tear his marriage apart. You see, Buzz was married to Joan Archer, his high school sweetheart. On paper, they were the perfect space couple with 3 beautiful kids. However, in reality, Joan had been holding the family together alone, while Buzz orbited fame. He was physically present, but emotionally absent. He was moody, distant, drunk, and Joan became exhausted. Sadly, in 1974, they officially divorced, and this one definitely hurt him. By the mid-1970s, Buzz was out of the spotlight. No more speeches, no NASA missions, just an ex-astronaut trying to get back on track with his life. His therapist advised him to find something normal to do, and so he ended up working at a Cadillac dealership in Beverly Hills. And unfortunately, he was terrible at it. For months, he could not figure out how to sell a single Cadillac. He eventually quit that job, but he sunk deeper into depression. All the while, the world still thought of him as a national icon. But behind closed doors, Buzz Aldrin was struggling. Finally, he checked himself into rehab and started writing, speaking, and owning his pain. He began talking honestly about his mental health, and that's when people stopped seeing him as a cartoon astronaut and started seeing the man underneath the suit. Buzz stayed silent for so long until he just couldn't anymore. And now, he's made some shocking revelations about what the Apollo 11 mission was truly like and the effect it had on the whole world. Buzz addresses the rumors. After years of staying relatively quiet about the emotional and psychological weight of the Apollo 11 mission, Buzz Aldrin eventually began to speak more openly, especially as he got older. In interviews from his 80s into his 90s, he no longer tiptoed around the questions and speculations people had been whispering for decades. He didn't dodge the emotional toll, didn't sugarcoat the strange moments, and he most certainly didn't stay silent when people tried to call the whole mission a hoax. Buzz described the moon as a place of complete stillness. He never pretended it was magical. There was no warm glow or music playing in the background. It was cold, silent, and empty. The surface was gray, dusty, and almost featureless. In his words, it felt both magnificent and desolate at the same time. That contrast stuck with him. The beauty of the accomplishment was real, but so was the weight of isolation. He wasn't just walking on another world. He was walking in a place completely lifeless, and that reality hit him hard. But what started to bother him more than his internal struggles after the mission was the growing number of people claiming he never walked on the moon at all. Over the years, conspiracy theories exploded. People on talk shows and online forums started picking apart old footage, pointing to shadows and flag movements, claiming it was all faked on a soundstage in a Hollywood studio. For a long time, Buzz tried to ignore them. He didn't want to give nonsense any attention. But as he aged, his patience wore thin. In 2002, something snapped in Buzz. Outside a hotel in Beverly Hills, a man named Bart Sibrel, one of the most vocal moon landing conspiracy theorists, ambushed Buzz with a camera crew. He shoved a Bible in Buzz's face and demanded that he swear he had walked on the moon. Then he started shouting, calling him a coward, a liar, and a thief. Buzz didn't scream. He didn't argue. He just calmly assessed the moment and, without saying a word, punched the man right in the face. Buzz was 72 years old at the time. The video went viral. People cheered, and even law enforcement didn't press charges because Buzz had no criminal records, and Bart didn't sustain any injuries. It felt like the entire world was on Buzz's side. They saw the whole situation for what it was: an aging hero defending the truth, defending his honor, and, frankly, defending history. In later interviews, Buzz explained that he didn't throw that punch out of anger. He threw it to stand up for what he believed in. He'd dedicated his life to space exploration. He'd put his life on the line. He stood on the moon and came back forever changed. And for someone to spit on all of that just for attention, for clicks, and for conspiracy fame was more than he could take. He later told newsmen, "I don't pay any attention to them, really. They're out for themselves, to make a name." Beyond that single moment, Buzz began talking more openly about the experience of Apollo 11. He's described how real it was, how dangerous it was, and how much of it was improvised on the fly. He brought out old photographs, flight logs, and mission records when asked, not to prove himself, but because people were finally listening. And this time, he wasn't trying to convince anyone who didn't want to believe. He was speaking for those who wanted the truth. He also opened up about a moment that had long been whispered about. During the trip to the moon, the crew saw something strange outside the spacecraft. It looked like a blinking object, moving with them, but they didn't think too much of it. NASA later identified it as a piece of their own equipment, possibly a discarded panel or insulation. At that time, they weren't sure what it was, but they didn't panic. Instead, they just made a note of it and kept moving. When asked about the possibility of aliens or life beyond Earth, Buzz always answered with a scientist's mind and an explorer's heart. He never claimed he saw anything otherworldly, but he's made it clear that he believes the universe is far too vast for humans to be alone. It wasn't proof, but probability. For Buzz, believing in life elsewhere didn't contradict what he experienced. In fact, it was part of why going to the moon mattered so much in the first place. It was a step into the unknown. But what frustrated him most was that so much of the focus shifted from what they actually accomplished to whether or not it even happened. He called that obsession tragic. He said it distracted from the thousands of engineers, scientists, flight directors, and test pilots who made Apollo 11 possible. He reminded people that a lie of that scale wouldn't hold up for a week, let alone for over 50 years. There were too many witnesses, too many documents, too much at stake. He wasn't interested in debunking every theory anymore. He just told the truth, as clearly and consistently as he could. Right now, Buzz has stopped worrying about convincing skeptics. He's all about speaking to the young people, those dreaming of going further than he ever could. He's made it clear that he doesn't want to be remembered as just an astronaut, but as someone who tried to push humanity forward, even when it was hard and even when it hurt. He says the moon landing is not a mystery, but a stepping stone to achieve more. Buzz's push for Mars colonization. Years later, after walking on the moon, Buzz isn't done, not even close. While others retired quietly, Buzz has doubled down on his next obsession, the planet Mars. He believes it isn't just the next destination, it's the main goal. And he's not shy about it either. He's made it clear that humans should have been on Mars decades ago. He said, "Our purpose, I believe, is to settle the planet Mars, and I think that should be our objective." Buzz has pushed this vision hard. He didn't just give speeches, he wrote books, like Mission to Mars, where he mapped out detailed plans on how to actually get there, real ideas and real timelines. And he didn't stop with words. He launched the Aldrin Family Foundation to fund space education and support the next generation of explorers. He wants kids thinking big, not just about space travel, but about living on another planet and building cities there. When Elon Musk and other billionaires jumped into the space race, Buzz didn't roll his eyes. He cheered them on. He didn't care who got us to Mars first, NASA or SpaceX, as long as humans went. To Buzz, the moon was just the beginning. His eyes were always locked on the red planet. And even in his 90s, he's shouting it loud and clear. Every day, I wake up and begin working on some way to help motivate the next generation to develop a challenging but realistic goal of exploring space. So I kicked up some dust on the moon. Big deal. That was great, but I don't want that to be my only legacy. I don't want to be remembered as an iconic voice from the past. I want to be remembered for making a huge impact on the future. But here's the question. Do you think we'll actually make it to Mars in our lifetime? Or will Buzz's dream remain just a dream? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and check out the next one on your screen for more updates.